Hey, what is up YouTube? Kolst here with this special video because this is a full power rankings of every card in the Taverns of Time adventure mini set, whatever you want to call it. But this was a very hard video to make because HS Replay does not actually, at least not in the typical the cards area, does not actually have data available for these cards. But there is a way, if you have premium, that you can go into the gallery view and actually look at the breakdown of stats here to actually get a pretty good idea. So as a result, I was able to make this, which I can pretty much guarantee at this point is the only list you can find anywhere on the internet, which is an actual data-driven ranking of all of these cards. And we're going to be ranking all of them, all the class cards, all the neutrals, all up against each other. And the way I did this was basically looking at that deck win rate up in the top right there, and essentially looking at that for the class cards, having to standardize them to neutral cards and then get a good sense of what cards they are similar to in power level. And as a result, with a couple exceptions, these cards are actually pretty gradual, and most of them are like kind of in the medium power level, so with not much gap in between. So with each card, I'll give an example of another card which is similar, just so you can kind of track, you know, the kind of power level we're talking about. And of course, if you like this kind of content, don't forget to like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff if you haven't already. Without further ado, let's get right into the first card on this list, which if you've been playing or watching Taverns of Time events, this should not be surprising to you at all. Number one is Cavern Dreamer. This is the Mage 1-drop, which absolutely, in its current form at least, should not exist in Arena, period. There are not very many cards I can compare this to because there are so few cards at this power level, but the card I'm going to compare this to is Gaia the Tectonic. So is Cavern Dreamer the best card in the game? No. But is Cavern Dreamer on 1 the best card in the game? Absolutely yes. And basically, you don't always have it on turn 1, so on average, it's going to be about as good as the average Colossal, and that's what Gaia is. Its turn 1 win rate, which I was able to see off this website, is over 77%, just absolutely insane. That's about the win rate played of Ysera, which is the highest played win rate card in the game, basically. So hopefully Blizzard's watching, please do something about this card. I don't even think like nerfing its stats is good enough personally. I think it needs to just go to 2 mana back where it belongs basically, or even more preferably, but you know. Well, let's not turn this into a Cavern Dreamer video. Let's move on to the next card on this list, which actually is not very far behind Cavern Dreamer. By my win rate, it was only 0.2% behind, and it is Chromie, the neutral legendary. The only legendary in the set. Every other card, by the way, is a common, which they're offered very often. Like Cavern Dreamer is in about 50% of decks, which is the most common card in Mage. So this is the only card on the list that isn't like super common. And the card I'm going to compare Chromie to is Ivus. Ivus, a card which you can is almost completely undraftable because its offering rate got nerfed twice and now it's basically not in the game anymore. But Chromie now is by far the most common legendary. You see it everywhere at high wins now. It's in almost 7% of all decks. If you don't know what it does, it shuffles 4 cards in your deck. 2 of them are value, 1 of them is a board buff, and 1 of them is consecration, basically. So it's a huge inevitability factor. If you play Chromie on turn 4, it's also very devastating. 64% win rate on turn 4. Nowhere near Cavern Dreamer, but very good. But with that, let's move on to the next card. So as I said, the top 2 cards here are way better than almost everything else in the game now, frankly, but except for, you know, Colossals and some of the other top cards. But now there's a significant drop off to cards that are still very good, but at least remotely fair. And the first one we're going to include here, the third card on this list, is Chrono Shot. That is the Hunter spell, which is basically a targeted freezing trap or a sap, you know, with freezing trap. The card I'm going to compare this to is Gear Grubber, which is a card that's basically just blatantly overstated. It's just a very good card, but as good as it is, it's really unfair, but it just, you know, it doesn't like win you games by itself, so that's kind of what keeps it away from the level of something like Cavern Dreamer or Chromie. The next card we're going to include here is Draconic Herald. That is the Warrior 6 mana 6/6, which allows you to discover a card, give it +3/+3, and put it on the top of your deck. Basically, this is a card that Warrior just really likes because it gives you a lot of stats, and it's something Warrior that likes to play for that kind of. It's stats that are very tempo efficient as well, so it's just very good. The card I'm comparing this to is Pelican Diver. Very functionally different card, but just, you know, power level wise. Next card here is Thief of Futures. That is the Rogue 3 mana 4/3 that copies the opponent's top card of their deck and gives you a copy of it, and also lets you know what it is. Comparing this to Bunker Sergeant here, basically it's just a very good card, gives you information. If your opponent does happen to dredge something up, and you're holding this, you can actually copy it, which is also very good. But just a lot of things you can do with this card. Very, very good card. Next one on this list, Master of Realities. The Shaman 6-drop, which was buffed to a 5/8, which basically any card you summon, you evolve it +2. Even your hero power becomes a random 3-drop. It's one of those super late game win conditions. You do have to, you know, have enough board control that it doesn't just die immediately, because it's too expensive to really combo it too much, at least not until you have like all 10 mana. So it's a little bit slow, but definitely a very good card for Shaman, because Shaman needs some way to win right now. Shaman's not played very much. The card I'm comparing this to power level wise is Faceless Corruptor. Next one on this list here is Grasp the Future, the Warlock spell, which is 4 mana, draw 2 cards and reduce their cost by 2. Basically, this has been a card that's felt very, very strong when I've played against it. I've gotten Warlocks down to 1 health, where they can't life tap, but then they play this card and then they get 2 free life taps that don't cost them health. It's just very, very good for Warlock, and it's essentially draw 2 cards for 0 mana. Just very, very good. The card I'm comparing this to power level wise is Evasive Worm. Next on this list is the first non-legendary neutral, which is Temporal Anomaly. This is the 2 mana 2/3 elemental, which when you draw it gives you a random spell from your class. Now unfortunately, if it starts in your opening hand, you don't draw it, so it doesn't actually give you that spell, so you would have to toss it, but sometimes you might want to keep it just as a 2-drop, you know. But overall, you know, it's very, very good. Overall, it's a very, very good card. I will say it is class dependent. Some classes just have better spells than others, so that's going to factor in a bit. You should pick it higher in some classes than others. But overall, putting it at the level without a spammy Arcanist, very, very good card still. Next card on this list, which we are now at number 9, is Stasis Elemental, the other Shaman card here. So this is a 4 mana 3/5, which freezes a minion until the Stasis Elemental is gone, which potentially can be a 4 mana 3/5 assassinate, or even, you know, of course it's not always going to work out that way. Your opponent might be able to deal with it and then it doesn't really do anything. They could also silence off the effect as well. It definitely has that kind of blowout potential, but it's going to be hit or miss. So I'm rating this about the level of a Slime Scale Diver. Still a very good card, but, you know, not a card that you really expect to win either game. And wrapping out the top 10 on this list, we have another neutral card. This time it is Timebound Giant. This is the 8/8, which becomes cheaper with every card you have drawn. This is probably a lot higher than people would have expected, and I can see that people aren't picking as much as a lot of the other neutrals. But the reason, one of the key reasons this card is good is because it can combo with specifically another one of the Taverns of Time cards, which we'll be talking about very, very soon, which is Possibility Seeker, which gives you way more card draws than you'd expect to have, and making this thing a lot cheaper. Without a combo like that, it's not that good, but if you do happen to have that combo, this card probably would be like, you know, top 5 on the list. Keep that in mind. If you don't have the combo, then don't rate it quite so highly. Overall, it's very good. I'm rating it at the level of Frantic Hippogriff here. Next up on the list here, we have Deja Vu, which is the 0 mana rogue spell. Discover a copy of the last spell you played this game. You know, you don't get that many spells in Arena, so you're going to get a copy of something good, assuming with the asterisk that you actually have something good. But usually you have Blood in the Water Reconnaissance, not so much anymore, but maybe Jackpot or something. You know, you'll get something good, right? If it's a value generator like Jackpot, it might be too slow, but overall, it's going to be pretty good. Obviously, again, it does rely, however, on you actually having good spells in your deck and actually drawing them, so rating about the same as Timebound Giant. Next up, we have the neutral card that we mentioned earlier, which was Possibility Seeker. This was previously a 4 mana 4/5, was buffed to 6 health, so now it's a 4 mana 4/6. It shuffles your hand into your deck, and then you draw the same number of cards that you shuffled in. One thing which you find out, which maybe wouldn't have been obvious just looking at the card, is that you can actually redraw the same cards that you put in. A 4 mana 4/6 is very, very good. It's overstated, but sometimes you just don't want to shuffle. It can be really bad, but it can also be really good if you get a bunch of bad cards, possibly because you just had a Cavern Dreamer hit a bunch of spells that weren't good. You can shuffle them all in and replace them with much better cards. You can shuffle back the coin, shuffle back just your 1-drops, whatever, right? So in spite of it being overstat, it's just not really a curve play. You kind of want to use it more tactically. But overall, it's one of the most common cards you see in this event, and for good reason. It's very, very good, especially if you use it intelligently. It will help you. Next up, we have Ripple in Time, which is the Priest 1 mana spell, which discovers a minion. If you play it this turn, it has Echo. So honestly, I'm yet to actually see that Echo effect ever happen, period. You don't see a lot of priests, there's not a lot of day for this, so this is where I'm putting it. I'm putting it at this high just because like discovering a minion is still good, and especially in priest, you need some way to scam a game, so this is one way to potentially do it. But overall, I would say probably don't expect it to be much more than just 1 mana discover a minion, but 1 mana discover a minion is still good. So card I'll compare it to here is Lion's Guard. Oh, and I think I forgot to mention Possibility Seeker. The card I'm comparing it to is Bloodguard, another kind of overstated minion. Next up we have Bronze Broodmother, the Paladin Dragon, which is a 5 mana 6/6, which is already very good and also gives you a whelp when you draw it. Overall, it's kind of funny to see a 5 mana 6/6 this low on the list, but that's just kind of where Hearthstone's power level's gotten, that a, you know, just blatantly overstat minion isn't even really that good at this point. I'm comparing this to Troll Batrider. It's a good card. We're halfway down the list at this point, and these are still good cards, right? And now let's move on to the next card, which is another priest card, Reminisce. This is 2 mana, discover, or actually just randomly generate 2 cards that your opponent has played this game and add them to your hand. So it's like 2 mana draw 2, but you want to play it generally later because you know, if you just hit your opponent's early curve, it's probably not going to help you too much, right? You want to probably either see when they play a super powerful card and then play this immediately to try to copy it, or you just wait as long as possible until you absolutely need it. You hopefully high roll it. Overall rating, that's still pretty high just because, you know, priest kind of lacks value a lot of the time, and this is just a way to get value. It's not the highest quality value, but it can be a way to, again, scam games. So comparing this card to Treasure Guard, and this is kind of where I would say on the list we're moving past cards that you actually want in your deck and moving on to cards that you're still like fine having. They're decent cards, but just nothing to write home about basically. So at number 16 on this list we have Fate Cleaver. This is the warrior 4 mana weapon, which when it destroys a minion, destroy all copies of it wherever they are. So I haven't played with this card yet, but I've been told like this effect actually happens more often than you would expect it to, but sometimes that is unfortunately because it's like a neutral Taverns of Time card and you also happen to have the card and then you destroy your own copy, so maybe you can't use it. It might be a little awkward, but overall on average it's basically just a 4 mana 4/2 weapon. Card I'll compare this to is Stubborn Suspect, just a decent curve drop, right? Same thing power level wise. Next card we have here is Blessing of Aeons. This is the Paladin card, which is 0 mana. At the end of each turn, your minion that you put this on gains +1/+1. So you can use this on some, like, you know, late game high health minion to just try to make it more of a win condition, have like a Juggernaut be slightly better. But I think the biggest use of this card is just to put it on a 1-drop and just pray that it sticks. Basically, just try to scam a game that way. So overall, very, very hit or miss, because if it doesn't stick for multiple turns, it's really not worth a card. So rating this at the power level of like an Evasive Draconid, even though obviously they function very, very differently. Next card we have on this list is Consider the Past. This is the other mage card. It's 3 mana, add 3 cards from the past to your hand. And I believe the way they define that is wild cards that were wild as of the time that this first event happened. So you're getting old cards. Basically, most of the time you're just not getting very good cards off of this, but it's still 3 mana, draw 3, and there are high rolls you can get. So it's not super great, but this is still like in the area of like, you'd consider a decent card, right? I'm comparing it power-wise to a Razormane Raider. Next up on this list, and the next 2 cards I think are actually probably the 2 most overrated cards in this entire event. They are both neutral. The first one we're going to talk about here is Timeway Wanderer. Is a 5 mana 6/3 which discovers a spell, makes it cost 5 less, and then puts it on top of your deck. So one note about this card is that it's extremely class dependent. Like it's much better in a class like Mage that actually has good mid-sized to big spells than some other classes. Because the thing with this card is that you're not even getting the spell right, you have to draw it, so it's not even a real discover value-wise. You're overpaying a lot for the card, so you really need to get something like at least like 3 or 4 mana for this to not completely suck. So in some classes, again like Mage, this card is a bit better than this, but in some classes you really don't want this. But overall, rating it about the level of like Battleground Battlemaster, again a card that can be very good but can also just be kind of useless. Next one here is Wildlands Adventurer, the other neutral. This is a 5 mana 5/5 which gives you a card from the Hall of Fame. So the Hall of Fame, again, these are like old cards, but there's some pretty good cards you can get. You can get Ragnaros, Sylvanas, you can get Azure Drake, which is in the Hall of Fame, and you do get the current version of Azure Drake. So there are some kind of cool ones, but again, it's like hit or miss, and you are overpaying getting a 5 mana 5/5, but not by too much. So it's a decent card. Again, It's just a little bit inconsistent. Isn't going to perform as well as just cards that are just, you know, better tempo, basically. I'm comparing this card power level wise to Coilfang Constrictor. So worth noting, that was number 20 on the list. We're still talking about, you know, pretty good cards here. And next on the list, we have Infinite Wolf, the Hunter card, which is a 3-mana 5/5 rush, and if this thing, after it attacks, assuming it survives, you shuffle it into your deck with 2 extra attack and health. Now, the awkward thing about this is that because it shuffles itself, you can't just like stick this on board and hit your opponent in the face with it. You could theoretically, I've never seen someone do this, but you could just play it and not attack with it, right? And then it could go face. But if you did that, then you just lose the body entirely, so. Most of the time, this is going to be basically like a targeted deadly shot, and maybe some upside if you redraw it, if that's what you want. But the fact that it just can't really go face with Hunter makes it a bit awkward sometimes. So overall, still a good card, but I'm rating it at the level of like a Gyrocopter. Now we're at number 22. There's only 6 cards left on the list, and this is where we're moving kind of past the cards that you really want in your deck. First one we have here is Rift Warden. This is the Warlock 7-mana 7/7, which discards a card, Death Rattle. If this dies, summon it. I'm rating this at like the level of like a Violet Teacher. Can be good, but just not exactly always what you want. Because it can also be awkward because you might lose a battle cry that you actually want, so that's kind of where some of the awkwardness comes in. Next card here we have is Infinite Murloc. We actually have 3 straight neutrals here. So this is the 1-mana 2/2, which shuffles a 1-mana 3/3. It makes all your future Infinite Murlocs bigger, so basically gives you a 1-mana 3/3, and then if you draw it and play it again, shuffles a 1-mana 4/4, right? So if you do happen to have a game basically you get to fatigue, it's amazing to have something like this, right? But but let's be real, that almost never happens, and a 1-mana 3/3, although it's overstated, isn't actually what you want by the time you actually draw it. So a lot of the time it actually makes your deck worse, and a 1-mana 2/2 really just isn't that amazing right now. So it's still like a decent card. I'm rating it at the level of like an Evasive Feywing. It's not a bad card, but it's just not exactly what you want. Next card here on the list is Stasis Dragon. This is the 6-mana 10/10 Dormant, awakens after 2 turns with Rush. A 2-turn Rush Dormant is effectively a 1-turn Dormant if you think about it, right? And so in a sense it's actually better because it's not vulnerable the turn that you would have like played it, right? But overall, this thing just feels really, really slow. I did have a Priest deck featuring 2 of them where it was very good, but overall it's just honestly not necessarily one. It just feels slow. The card I'm comparing this to power level wise is Legionnaire, another card which is like very good value, but it's just slow. Next up at number 25 is Timeline Witness. This is a card that I've played like a decent amount. I think I played like 20 runs. I'm still yet to actually even draft this card. It's a 3-mana 2/4. When you draw a card naturally at the start of your turn, it does specify it has to only be that start of turn draw. Then you get to discover a card from your deck instead. Basically, you get a free 0-mana tracking, but you're playing an understated minion and it has to stick for you to get that effect at all. It's kind of surprising because I see it all over the place, but honestly, I don't know. I'm yet to draft it because it's just never felt worth drafting to me. And I have this card rated at the level of a Kindling Elemental. Again, a card that you just don't, it's understated, you just don't really want it. Can be good, it can have its moments if you play it early and it sticks, but just doesn't really feel worth it to me. And with that, let's move on to the last 2 cards on this list. If you've been keeping track, well, I was going to say there's one class we haven't mentioned yet. There's actually 2, because Demon Hunter doesn't have any cards from the new set. There is one other class that does have cards that we have not mentioned yet, and that is Druid, because the bottom 2 cards on this list are both the Druid cards. Druid has dropped to the bottom of win rates on HS Replay, and these cards, as we mentioned earlier, are very, very common, and this is a huge reason why. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad if people just didn't pick these cards, but some people probably are. And the first one here is, this one's like okay. This is Harbinger of Catastrophe. This is a 6-mana 6/7, basically a Boulder Fist Ogre with the effect at the start of your turn, summon a card from both players' decks. So you can try to theoretically draft Big Druid and make this effect good, quote unquote symmetric effect. The problem with this though is that once you think about it, it's not actually an equal effect, because here's the big thing. You get it it is summoned at the start of your turn, which means that yours comes in with Summoning Sickness unless it happens to be a rush or something. But your opponent's summoned on your turn, so theirs is able to attack immediately. So this is actually not an equal effect. This is actually a bad effect. So yeah, and overall just a very risky card. It can be fine, but it can also lose you the game very easily. Because imagine you just summon your opponent's Colossal out of their deck that they wouldn't have even drawn. It'd be very bad. But overall it might not be too bad. But you know what really will be bad? The only card in this entire event that is not good, is very, very bad. It is the last Druid card, which is Flash Forward. 2 mana, each player gains 2 mana crystals and draws 2 cards. So this is an actually true symmetrical effect, but you're paying a card in 2 mana for it, and your opponent is just getting it for free, right? Like it's still not good. It's just doesn't really help you unless you're playing some crazy ramp druid somehow in arena, which shouldn't happen. It's just not good. Like, you just don't want to do this typically. So overall, just a terrible, terrible card. And I forgot to mention my comparison for the Harbinger Catastrophe. Power level wise is like a Spark Engine, just a card you don't really want typically. This card I'm comparing to Piloted Reaper, a card which is just bad and often can be actively bad. But with that is it for our list. I'm interested to hear what everyone has to say about these, what you guys think. So have any thoughts about it? Comment something in the comment section. If you haven't already, hit the like button and subscribe to support this kind of content. Appreciate all the support as always. Thanks a lot for hanging out again. Hope to see you in the next one, or see you on Twitch, twitch.tv/kolst. I'll be on probably around when this video uploads. So yeah, again, we'll see you guys in the next one.